Today, we're diving into sustainability.
In design.
In design, right. We're focusing specifically on architecture and the built environment in general. I think this will be an interesting one because we've got a ton of source material here to go through, a lot of really interesting stuff about how to make the spaces we live and work in, well, more aligned with the future we want to see.
Yeah.
A future that's, sustainable.
Yeah. We're going to try to give you a solid understanding of what sustainable design really is and why it's so crucial. I think there are some really surprising things in here too.
Yeah.
About how the concept has evolved.
Yeah.
I think people will find that pretty fascinating. We'll try not to get too bogged down in the technical jargon though.
Right. So when we talk about sustainable design, what are we really talking about here?
Well, at its most basic level, it's about creating spaces and products, things that people use and interact with every day.
Buildings,
yeah. And trying to make sure those things don't just harm the environment,
right,
but actually help to heal it or regenerate it.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not just about doing less bad.
Exactly.
It's about actually making things better.
Absolutely. So thinking about healthier spaces, more comfortable spaces, spaces that actually promote a better relationship with the natural world around us.
Okay, so it sounds like there's like a pretty big philosophical element to this.
Oh, definitely. And one of the kind of key ideas is this thing called the triple bottom line.
Triple bottom line.
Right.
I've heard that term before.
Yeah, it's like the ethical framework, or you could think of it as a compass to guide sustainable design.
What are the three points of the compass here?
So first, you've got environmental sustainability. That's the most obvious one, right? So trying to minimize, the damage we do to the planet, making sure we use resources responsibly. And then you've got social sustainability. This is all about making sure that we're creating spaces that are inclusive, they respect cultural heritage, and actually make communities better, healthier places to live. And then the third one is economic sustainability. And this means making sure that these solutions actually make sense economically. They need to be cost effective and have long-term value.
Yeah, because if it doesn't make financial sense, then it's not going to be sustainable in the long run.
It's not going to work.
Yeah.
Exactly. What's interesting, though? It's not always easy to balance all three of these things perfectly.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Sometimes you have to make tough choices and figure out what the best compromise is for a particular project.
I think it's easy to assume that sustainable design is like a relatively new idea.
Yeah.
But when you really look at it, a lot of traditional building techniques were inherently sustainable.
Absolutely. Before we had all this fancy technology, people had to be a lot smarter about how they built things. They had to work with nature, not against it.
Yeah. like out of necessity.
Totally. Yeah. They were surprisingly good at it.
Oh, yeah. I was reading about...
Give me an example.
Yeah, like thick adobe walls in desert climates.
Right.
They weren't just for structure. They were... they absorbed heat during the day, and then they released it slowly at night. So you had natural cooling without needing any electricity. It's brilliant.
Absolutely. It's like a giant thermal battery built right into the walls. And there are tons of examples like that. Indigenous knowledge systems are full of incredibly sophisticated ways of using local materials to create sustainable buildings. Like, they knew exactly what materials to use, how to orient the building.
Right.
And they did it all in a way that was, respectful of the local ecosystem.
Yeah. These aren't just quaint historical examples. We can learn a lot from them today.
That's right.
I think looking back to the 20th century, we really see this shift toward a more modern environmental consciousness, don't we? Books like Silent Spring by Rachel Carson or Buckminster Fuller's concept of Spaceship Earth.
Right.
They really started to change how we thought about our relationship with the planet.
Absolutely. Those were like landmark moments, right? They really helped to kickstart the modern environmental movement.
Yeah.
And then along with that, you had, all these movements in the 60s and 70s that really brought environmental issues to the forefront. And that led to some pretty big changes. Like, think about the energy crisis in the 1970s. That was a major wake-up call.
For sure.
And it really forced people to start taking energy efficiency seriously. And that's when we saw the surge of interest in passive solar design, which we were just talking about.
Right.
Like, how do we use the sun's energy more effectively? And then, of course, you had Earth Day, which started in 1970. And then we started to see the first environmental building codes. And then on a global level, you had the Agenda 21 Declaration in 1992, which was all about sustainable development.
Yeah. So, it sounds like there's a lot of groundwork laid.
Definitely.
For what we're seeing today. And, it seems like there's been a real shift from just green building to these more ambitious ideas that are really trying to make a positive impact.
Yeah, it's gone way beyond just making buildings a little bit less bad.
Right.
It's about actually trying to make them part of the solution.
Yeah.
So in the 90s and early 2000s, we saw this rise of green building rating systems. Things like LEED in the US, BREEAM in the UK.
Right. Green Star.
Green Star in Australia, yeah.
Okay.
And these were really important because they gave the industry, a way to measure how sustainable a building actually was. Like, are you using the right materials? Are you saving enough energy?
Okay, so kind of a standardized way
to assess it, yeah.
To assess it, yeah, okay.
But I think even more recently, we've seen even bolder ideas emerge. Things like regenerative design. Which is about actually healing ecosystems, not just not harming them. Right, yeah.
Right. And then net zero architecture, where buildings produce as much energy as they use. Or even net positive, where they produce more energy than they use.
Yeah.
That's pretty wild, right? And then this idea of a circular economy, where we design things so that they can be reused, repaired, and recycled. So we're not just throwing stuff away all the time.
So it's not just about the building itself.
Right.
It's about how it's designed, how it's built.
Right. It's a whole different way of thinking about the entire process.
Yeah. So, like, where does that process even begin?
Well, one of the most important things is really understanding the site,
Okay.
where you're going to build. You need to know, like, where the sun is throughout the day,
Right.
what direction the wind blows,
Yeah.
what kind of plants and trees are there, how does water flow across the site.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that information informs what we call passive design.
Passive design, okay. Which is about using natural forces to heat and cool the building, reduce the need for, energy-intensive systems. So, for example, knowing where the sun is, that'll tell you how to position the windows to get the most sunlight in the winter
Right.
when you need the heat. And then maybe you design overhangs to shade those same windows in the summer.
Keep it cool.
Exactly. And then there's natural ventilation, using the wind to circulate air through the building. And we also look at the existing infrastructure. Like, can people get to the building easily using public transportation?
That's a good point. Yeah.
Are there bike paths? That kind of stuff.
Right.
That all contributes to the overall sustainability.
So I'm guessing this involves a lot of collaboration.
Oh, definitely. You can't do this in a vacuum.
Yeah.
You need architects, engineers, landscape designers, environmental consultants, everybody working together from the very beginning.
Right. So it's not just like the architect
Not at all.
comes up with a design and then everybody else tries to make it work.
No, it's much more integrated than that. Okay.
And there's actually a term for it, the integrated design process, or IDP.
IDP.
And the idea is that, you get everybody together early on and they all work together to figure out the best solution. So you don't end up, trying to shoehorn something in later that doesn't really fit.
Right.
Like, the energy system should actually be part of the design from the very beginning.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's not something you just tack on at the end.
And you mentioned earlier evaluating a building's impact.
Yeah.
From start to finish.
Cradle to grave, they call
Cradle to grave.
it. Right.
And that's where life cycle assessment comes in.
Exactly. Life cycle assessment, or LCA, is basically a way to look at all the environmental impacts of a building, or, even a specific material.
Okay.
So you look at, like, where did the raw materials come from? How much energy did it take to manufacture them? How are they transported to the construction site?
Then, how much energy and water does the building use while it's operating? And then, what happens to it at the end of its life?
Does it get demolished?
Yeah, does it get demolished? Can it be reused? Can it be recycled? And LCA is really important because it can reveal some pretty surprising things. Like, sometimes a material that seems really green on the surface might actually have a big environmental impact when you consider its whole life cycle.
Yeah, I guess it's easy to overlook things.
Right.
When you're just looking at one piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. You have to look at the big picture. And this is a tool that helps you do that.
And then the building's finished, right? It's
Yeah.
occupied.
Right.
But it doesn't just end there, does it?
No, sustainability is an ongoing process.
Right.
And that's where post-occupancy evaluation comes in, or POE.
POE. Okay, so what is that exactly?
So POE is basically going back to the building after it's been in use for a while and seeing how it's actually performing. Like, is it using as much energy as we thought it would? Is it comfortable for the people who are using it?
Yeah.
How much maintenance does it need? And is it adaptable to future needs?
Right.
And this is really valuable because it gives you feedback that you can then use to improve the design of future buildings.
Yeah, it's like continuous improvement.
Totally. You learn from your mistakes, you learn from what worked well,
Yeah.
and you use that knowledge to keep getting better.
Okay, so we've talked about, like, the big picture.
Right.
The process. I'm kind of curious about, like, the nitty-gritty, like the actual design practices. You mentioned passive design earlier. Can you tell me a little more about that?
Oh, yeah. Passive design is super cool.
Yeah.
I mean, it's basically about working with nature to create comfortable spaces.
So how does that actually work?
Well, it's all about using the building's form, the way it's positioned on the site, and the materials you use to control things like heat, light, and airflow. So, for example, you can orient the building so that it gets a lot of sunlight in the winter. Right.
To help heat it naturally. And then maybe you design overhangs or awnings to shade those same windows in the summer to prevent it from getting too hot. And then there's natural ventilation. So you can design windows and other openings to take advantage of prevailing winds.
To kind of pull air through the building.
Exactly. It's like creating a natural breezeway.
Right.
And then there's this concept called thermal mass.
Thermal mass.
Yeah. And that's basically using materials that can absorb a lot of heat,
Yeah.
like concrete or stone.
Mhm.
And they'll absorb heat during the day and then slowly release it at night.
Kind of like a natural heating and cooling system.
That's right. It helps to keep the temperature more stable, so you don't need to use as much energy to heat or cool the building.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing what you can do just by being clever about the design.
So passive design is about working with natural forces.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the other side of that, you've got the active systems, right?
Right. So that's where we get into things like energy efficiency and renewable energy.
Okay.
So energy efficiency is about making the building itself use as little energy as possible. So you might have, really good insulation in the walls and roof.
Right.
Triple pane windows to keep the heat in. And then making sure that the building is really airtight so there are no drafts.
Okay.
And then on top of that, you can add things like solar panels to generate electricity.
Yeah.
Geothermal heat pumps to use the Earth's natural heat to warm and cool the building. And even, small wind turbines in some cases.
Yeah.
And you can even use battery storage to make sure you have enough energy, even when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing.
So, I mean, you can really get pretty close to...
Being self-sufficient, yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
What about water conservation? I mean, that's got to be a huge part of this, too.
Definitely. Especially with climate change and water scarcity becoming bigger and bigger problems. So we look at things like, low-flow toilets and shower heads.
Yeah. Gray water recycling systems where you can reuse water from sinks and showers to water the plants or flush the toilets. Rainwater harvesting systems where you collect rainwater from the roof. And then things like green roofs and bioswales, which help to manage stormwater runoff.
Okay, yeah. So it's like a multifaceted approach.
Absolutely. You have to attack it from all angles.
And then, of course, there are the materials we actually use to build the building.
Oh, yeah. The materials are crucial. We try to use renewable resources as much as possible, like sustainably harvested wood, that's certified by the Forest Stewardship Council, so it's coming from responsibly managed forests. And then recycled materials, like recycled steel or reclaimed lumber.
Okay.
And whenever possible, we try to source materials locally to reduce the transportation impact.
Right. Yeah.
And then we're also really careful about avoiding materials that have toxins in them, like VOCs or formaldehyde. Those can really mess with indoor air quality.
Oh, for sure.
And then there are also things like prefabrication and modular construction, which can actually reduce waste during the construction process. And then there's this idea called design for disassembly,
Design for disassembly.
which is basically designing the building so that it can be easily taken apart at the end of its life. And then materials can be reused or recycled.
Interesting. So we've talked a lot about the building's impact on the environment. But what about the people who are actually living and working inside these buildings?
Oh, yeah. That's super important, too. We want to make sure these spaces are actually healthy and comfortable for people.
Yeah.
So that's where we get into things like indoor environmental quality.
Okay.
So things like making sure there's plenty of natural light
Right.
and views to the outside. Because that's been shown to, improve people's mood and productivity. And making sure that the air quality is good. Using non-toxic materials, having good ventilation, making sure that the temperature and humidity are comfortable, and then reducing noise.
Right. All that stuff.
Yeah. And then designing spaces that are flexible.
Yeah.
So they can be adapted to different uses over time.
Okay.
Because that helps to extend the life of the building.
Right. And it prevents waste.
Exactly. And then there's this whole other area called biophilic design.
Biophilic design. Okay. What's that all about?
It's fascinating. It's about recognizing this like deep connection that humans have to nature
Yeah.
and then trying to bring those elements into our buildings. So things like, plants and living walls,
Right.
natural materials and textures, lots of natural light, even just designing spaces that have more organic shapes.
Okay.
It's been shown to have like all these benefits,
Like what?
like reducing stress, improving focus, boosting creativity, even speeding up healing in hospitals.
Wow. So we've got all these different aspects to sustainable design. How do we know if a building is actually doing all these things well?
Right. That's where certification systems come in.
Okay.
So you've got things like LED, which we mentioned earlier. That's probably the most well-known one in North America. And it looks at things like, how sustainable is the site? How much water does the building use? How energy efficient is it? What kind of materials are used? What's the indoor environmental quality like? And they give buildings different levels of certification, like certified, silver, gold, platinum.
Right. Kind of like a grading system.
Yeah, exactly. And then you've got BREEAM in the UK and Green Star in Australia, which are similar,
All right.
but they have their own specific criteria. And then there are certifications like the Well Building Standard, which is specifically focused on health and well-being.
The well building standard.
Yeah. So they look at things like air quality, water quality, access to healthy food, how much light people are getting, how comfortable they are, even things like fitness and mental health.
And then there's that really tough one.
Oh, yeah. The Living Building Challenge. That's like the gold standard.
Of a building challenge.
Yeah. It's super rigorous.
Yeah.
Like, buildings have to generate all their own energy on site using renewables. They have to treat all their own wastewater. They can only use non-toxic materials. It's a really high bar.
Wow. So, I mean, these certification systems are important for accountability, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
They give the industry a common language, a set of standards to work towards.
Yeah.
They push everyone to do better.
Okay. Now, I want to talk about some real world examples.
Okay.
Like buildings that are actually doing all this stuff. You got any good ones?
Oh, tons.
Okay, give me a few.
So there's the Bullitt Center in Seattle.
The Bullitt Center.
Yeah. That one's often called like the greenest commercial building in the world. It's net zero energy.
Wow.
It collects all its own water. It even has composting toilets.
Composting toilets.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And then you've got the Pixel Building in Melbourne, Australia.
Okay.
That one's got wind turbines built into the facade, a rooftop garden, an automated shading system. It even used carbon neutral concrete. And then there's the Kotek Poot Hospital in Singapore.
Okay.
That one's a really great example of biophilic design.
Okay.
Lots of greenery, water features, natural light. It's like a healing oasis.
So, I mean, these examples are pretty inspiring.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm guessing it's not all sunshine and roses, right?
Oh, of course not. There are definitely challenges.
Like what?
Well, one of the biggest ones is cost.
Right.
Sustainable materials and technologies can sometimes be more expensive up front.
Okay.
Although in the long run, they often save money. But that initial investment can be a hurdle. And then, you have to find clients who are actually committed to sustainability, because if they're not on board, it's going to be really tough.
Yeah.
And then there's this problem called the performance gap.
Performance gap.
Yeah, where buildings don't actually perform as well as they were supposed to, maybe because of like how people are using the building or just design flaws.
Yeah.
And then there's greenwashing, where companies try to make their products or projects seem more sustainable than they really are.
Oh, yeah.
That's a big problem. And then I think sometimes there's a tendency to rely too much on technology. Like fancy gadgets and systems, when maybe a simpler passive design solution would have been better.
Right. So it's about finding that balance.
Exactly.
So where do we go from here? What's the future of sustainable design?
Oh, man. It's an exciting time.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see even more focus on regenerative design.
Okay.
Like, how can buildings actually give back to the environment? And then the circular economy is going to become even more important. So designing things for reuse and recycling. And then with climate change, climate adapted design is going to be huge. Like, how do we design buildings that can withstand extreme weather events? And then there's also this growing emphasis on equitable sustainability, making sure that everybody benefits from these ideas, not just, wealthy people. And then, of course, technology is going to play a big role, like AI and smart buildings.
Right.
So there's a lot to be optimistic about. I think we're just scratching the surface of what's possible.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground here today.
We have.
But I think one thing's really clear. Sustainable design isn't just some, passing fad.
Definitely not.
It's a fundamental shift in how we think about the built environment.
Absolutely. It's about creating spaces that are good for people and good for the planet.
Right. And it's not just about buildings either, is it?
No,
I mean, if we can apply these principles to architecture and cities, then, I mean, shouldn't we be applying them to everything?
totally.
I mean, like our lifestyles, our products, the systems we create. I mean, what would a truly regenerative way of life look like?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer, but I think it's something we all need to be thinking about. And maybe it starts with just being more aware of the choices we make every day
Right.
and asking ourselves, is this sustainable? Is this regenerative? Is this helping to create the future we want to see?
Hmm. Well, that's something for all of us to ponder.
It is.